welcome everybody to this panel, which is about the work of the extra working group within the World Academy, which stands for Existential Threats and Risks to All. So what we are concerned with, and not just us, but I think just about everybody, unless they live under a rock, is the emerging polycrisis, the systemic crisis that is emerging from a number of different directions, whether it's nuclear war, climate change, AI, and many other, on many fronts, and also political developments. On many fronts, our future seems precarious, and it would be very good to stay well informed about all these different threats, especially for those people who are in positions of responsibility. However, to do that would be just about a full-time job. Just to stay up to date with, say, climate change is something that I'm particularly interested in and have been for many years, is a huge job. There's so much news in the media. There's so much being published in academic sources. There are many, many reports from some of the major players. And to get an idea of the whole systemic situation is just about impossible. It takes a whole team of people to sort through the masses of information, and that is exactly what we are proposing to do and what we have done. And first of all, Mike, who's been working very hard with Lorenzo on the directory, which is a very large repository of information on all these different threats. Now I'm going to share my screen and show you the website that we've been building. It's not yet a website, but it's so this is what the website looks like. Yeah, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, good. So that's the landing page. You see the main directory here. So this is a static image still. So we already have a website, but it's not quite finished yet, which is embedded within the World Academy website. Okay, so that's the landing page. There's some general introductory material. There is a kind of a map of the site, which I should probably show you, or it's worth looking at in detail. So that's kind of a site map. So we have a short selection of reports called the top 20. There must be reason, there must be absolutely among the most important pieces of information you might want to read. And then we have the directory, which is in the center. That's the main repository. And we have an archive for reports that are good for reference, for research, but not so current. Okay. And that's going to fill over time. It's still empty at the moment because for now we've just selected what is important. So we've got some introductory information. We have some information on what the nature of the threat is, or in a polycrisis situation. It's called 10 Key Insights. And we have some a network of almost 100 organizations, which we think are key organizations in this field. And finally, we have a newsletter, which you can subscribe to. There'll be a subscription form on the website. Sorry, no, that's too small. Okay. So they are the 10 key ideas. How's that? Okay. So that's a directory. They are the main categories and the subcategories. So we've got 5 categories: overviews. That means general, broad reports covering several areas. Then planet, people, security, and sustainability, and several subcategories, which will all be browsable. Okay. And then this to the 10 key ideas, and Michael will say more about that in a minute. Then we have the About page, which just explains a little bit about who we are and what we do. Pictures have yet to be finalized. Contact form. Then we have the directory, of course, the 20 recent reports of note. And you can just click a link and read the report. You can also search the subcategory which it belongs to by clicking on the categorization. So these are just examples. Then this is what the main directory will look like with the 4 categories. Actually, it's 5. Yeah. So in this case, the security tab is open, and you get to look at the entries. Okay. Some editorial remarks. And this is the news section where you can access the newsletter, find out about upcoming events, read interviews, articles, and reviews that have been in the newsletter. They always publish there first and then go into this repository. Finally, there's a section on networks listing our partners and relevant organizations and networks, also by subject index. And that's all. So I'll just stop sharing now. How do I do that? Oh, hold on. Stop share. Okay, I got it. Okay, so that's just an overview of the website that we've been building, which is a culmination of quite a lot of work. And let me just emphasize that by launching this website, we've kind of emerged from a phase where we really kept our heads down and worked hard to get this together. And now we're reaching out to everyone in the audience who is interested, and we'll be reaching out to the full audience during the General Assembly as well. And we'll be writing an email to all fellows, inviting you to join in if you have any expertise on these areas of existential threats, whether it's climate change or AI or whatever it might be. Have a look at the website. If you can see yourself contributing expertise to those areas and you think you could help us find the best material for our information hub, that would be very helpful. Get in touch with us, please. We'd like to hear from you. The other thing is we'll have events. We hope to have interviews, webinars, and other events, and maybe also some Foresight training available soon. So we'll be in touch with that. And the best way to find out about it is to subscribe to our newsletter. Okay. All right. Well, I'll hand over to Mike now, who's our research director and who has been the driving force behind the directory. Mike, over to you.
Hello to everybody. I have a prologue to what I want to say. 20 years ago, in 2005, I attended the WAAS General Assembly in Zagreb on knowledge futures, where I made a presentation that resulted in the future of human benefit knowledge, notes on a world brain for the 21st century. And this is published in the special issue of Futures in October 2007, edited by Walt Anderson, who was president at the time. And it cited Knowledge for What, published in 1938 by U.S. sociologist Robert Lind on the tendency of modern science to be atomistic. And it also was built on the 1936-37 lectures by H.G. Wells on a world brain. I also proposed annual top 10 book posts for each sector and prioritizing of issues and so forth. Well, nothing happened. My world brain update was highly idealized and followed, I should note, by an equally idealized essay by Gary Jacobs on the dangerous knowledge and abolishing nuclear weapons. I never had any feedback in my article on Futures. Now, fast forward 18 years, WAAS set up a working group on existential threats and risks, and I was somehow fell into the role of being research director. So I started looking at the literature and how people look at existential threats and risks, which are somewhat different, but they also overlap in usage. And what we came up with instead is a small evidence-based and focused version of the world brain that's devoted to human benefit knowledge. And this may or may not work. We're still in the early phases. We have a lot of experimentation and changes and discussion as what's in and out because it requires selection. But instead of a vast world brain with lots of information, we try to boil it down into something that's meaningful. So on the top of all this, I came up with 10 key ideas related to existential threats and risks, and even that is a big mouthful, 10 at a time. So it's broken down in 3 categories. The first category is 3 obvious ideas, or what ought to be obvious. Second category is complications, and the third one has to do with action ideas. Now, the 3 obvious ideas. The first one is that existential threats and risks are growing. It isn't simply that they are there, but there are more of them, and well-informed people are getting more worried. I have several references on that, but perhaps the most notable that I like is the Global Risks Report of the World Economic Forum in Davos, which surveys more than 900 experts, ranks 33 risks over the next 2 and 10 years, and has a generally gloomy outlook. Most of you have probably also heard of the Doomsday Clock or the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and it's closer to midnight than it ever has been, but it's the notion of doomsday was initiated because of the fear of a nuclear war, which is still there. It's rising somewhat, in fact. But it's not necessarily doomsday for all of us, and as I will subsequently explain. However, that's the first idea, that they are growing. Second idea are the elephants in the room. I mean, some risks are greater than others. And traditionally, it's been the risk of nuclear warfare, which hasn't happened in 80 years and hopefully won't happen again, although there are worries on a number of fronts about rising arsenals and better ways to deliver the weapons. But the second elephant in the room, obviously, is climate change, which is quite different. It's manifested in 5 different ways in which the increasing frequency and intensity of heat waves and storms and floods and drought and wildfires. The third elephant is artificial intelligence, and especially artificial general intelligence. For those of you who saw yesterday's session, or Jerry Glenn was taking a lead in warning this. And just yesterday, Jerry sent something to me where the administration of you-know-who in the White House is giving a green light to the development of artificial intelligence because we're in competition with China. And so the idea of guardrails, at least being promoted by the United States, is on the shelf, if even near the shelf at the moment. So, and then the fourth elephant that's kind of behind that won't necessarily manifest itself as a new pandemic, especially from a mutation of the H5N1 bird flu. So the third basic key idea is what I call doom for whom, and to point out that there's inequitable risks both in space and time, that in a nuclear explosion, everybody's going to get zapped, but not everybody worldwide necessarily. But for climate change, is obviously it's those who most be affected will be women, children, poor countries, and poor people, outdoor workers, and the disabled. So also you have to consider the young people. The multi-decade lifespans of young people are threatened far more than the lifespans of our seniors. So the bottom line outlook from this is human extinction or a major global catastrophe is not inevitable or impossible. My position is a moderate one, somewhere between panic and poo-poo, tending towards the former over time. It is possible, extinction is possible over the next 15 years, most likely due to AGI without effective guardrails. Without major positive transformation, it is probable in the following 30 years, which is most likely due to climate tipping points, exceeding planetary boundaries, major wars, and or unbound AGIs. So just have to think about this over time. Now, the next four key ideas are four complications involved. First, that there's different terminology and definitions. There's all more or less about the same thing. The future-oriented terms are threats, risks, challenges, catastrophes, global shocks, and disruptions on the horizon. Present-oriented terms are polycrisis, global turbulence, which is the title of this conference, and a perfect storm, which is if you think we've seen a perfect storm now, what happens when things get much worse? So there's also, to complicate that, is that there's different definitions under each of these general labels. So arguably, fragmentation is the most appropriate terms for this situation. Okay, that's the fourth key idea. The fifth one is different timelines. Nuclear is quick and could be the total. Climate impacts are scattered, varied, and not total in large areas. So there's many negative impacts over the next few years from AI, and they won't necessarily be all together, but we aren't quite sure what yet, just that there's a potential. On to six key ideas. A complication is that there's different and changing probabilities. An October 2024 report on probabilities of nuclear catastrophe by 2024 had a median 5% probability among 120 experts. Climate change is certain, but the question is always how much and when and where and how soon. Tipping points appear likely, but a question of how soon. And then the key idea number 7 is that there's different remedies and different headwinds. There's many different actions that can be taken or are underway, notably accelerating the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Also, there are thousands of organizations promoting security and or sustainability, and hundreds of reports advocating desirable and feasible action. For example, just 2 of them for my top 20, the Global Governance Innovation Report from the Stimson Center in June, and very notably the Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, which describes cost-effective remedies for the big 5 disasters, which are earthquakes, floods, storms, drought, and heat waves that account for more than 95% of direct losses. Many of these losses are preventable. Unfortunately, at the same time with many different remedies and some underway, there are many headwinds. Vested interests, right-wing autocratic governments, disinformation, rising costs, denial, infoglut, and immediate national concerns. Finally, there are 3 action orientations that I have. Number 8 is to combine existential threats and risks with positive trends and proposals such as the SDGs and human security for all. I think that you can sell the idea of human security even better if you point out the existential risks that you're trying to overcome. Number 9 for key ideas is to There are already many education programs worldwide and organizations trying to support it both in schools and colleges and universities. A couple dozen of them that we have listed in the Securities and Sustainability Guide. And they're focused on sustainability right now, perhaps the SDGs, but they ought to be able to approach them somehow and show how human security is a desirable ideal, and at the same time, the existential threats and risks that we have to reduce or mitigate, possibly eliminate in a few cases. Finally, is a key idea that there's going to be lifelong learning for needed transformations. We live in an ignorant society and world where our learning needs are outdistancing attainments. So transformation to greater sustainability and security over the next decades will require continued learning by all age groups and expanded horizons to understand and address ongoing and probably greater global turbulence. So in addition to adding extra to the SDGs and human security for all, human security should be combined with national security. Each should be seen as a central part of the other, and idealism should be balanced with the realism promoted by extra. 2 or 3 years ago, Netflix had an excellent documentary on life on this planet, 6-part series going back to the dinosaurs, and it is produced by Steven Spielberg and narrated by Morgan Freeman. And at the end of the final category, there's maybe 5 or 6 minutes in which they showed modern life and the suggestion that Homo sapiens may be overrunning the planet, which is true. And then Morgan Freeman had a very interesting statement. He said, well, at least we're the first species that knows where we're headed, which in one sense is correct, and in the other sense is vastly simplistic. Because together as a species, we don't know where we're at, and this is the problem: is to try to get some collective sense, and to take appropriate actions to
actually, Mike,
the next century.
That speaks exactly to a comment that was just in the chat from. There was just a comment in the chat from Alex Shenderov about whether extra concerns itself with the human mind and the nature of human nature, and definitely that is very, very, very important to consider. You know, what are the underlying causes of human behavior, and what are the reasons why we are not properly addressing some of the threats that we face, even though we have the technological means to do so. And that is a discussion we cannot have today, but yes, we are interested in that, and we'd like to have perhaps a webinar on that specific topic, where we have more time to go deeply into these questions. But I'll hand over now to Lorenzo. Lorenzo will be talking about the newsletter, the ways in which we hope to keep you updated and keep the website constantly updated as an info hub should be. Lorenzo.
Thank you very much, Thomas. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'll try to keep myself brief to the 8 minutes before giving space to Ortwin. I'll be fully honest with you. We are establishing a certain work stream to operate with the newsletter, in which we will invite you, and we would like to see feedback and collaboration, and so many good comments as the ones that we saw in the chat box. Because at the moment there are 3 different stages in the elaboration of the newsletter, and even in the elaboration of the directory in the future, as this is a very lean working group of reduced manpower. Therefore, although we understand the reservations regarding artificial intelligence, we are still using it with full human supervision. The newsletter is partially assisted with artificial intelligence, such as certain elements of the directory. There are 3 stages in which we are now: the gathering of information, the creating of that information, and then the writing of that information. With the gathering of it, we use Google Alerts as a system after establishing a certain type of keywords that are of interest to us based on the different manifestations of existential risk and threats that we have identified. Then we use other artificial intelligence tools, or at least I use them, that allow you to work as a search engine, such as Perplexity, artificial intelligence, and specific custom GPTs. And then another important part of that gathering of information will be to do an open call, a recruitment of collaborators among WAAS fellows, junior fellows, and everyone that could be interested in become a brain cell of this whole effort and sending us any news article, report, or any potential source of information or event that they may deem meaningful for this enterprise. So that will be the gathering of information. It will require a lot of human criteria. It's not that we're fully automatizing it, but precisely because we are a very small working group, we do need certain support of the available tools. Then we have the creating of information, in which Thomas is actively participating in the newsletter regard, and in the directory, Mike Marion remains as the main collaborator contributor in that sense. Then we would like to establish in the future the possibility of thematic clusters of certain group of experts that act as resident consultants regarding certain reports, certain news articles, because we recognize that it's very difficult to become an expert on something, and you need a full trajectory of your whole life to be considered yourself an expert in food security or nuclear threats. Therefore, we would like to take advantage of that and request comments from people that have a full lifetime, particularly on that. Ideally, it would be great to have two senior WAAS fellows, or maybe one WAAS fellow, another one, or one person external from WAAS, and then one junior fellow to try to keep that cluster, that thematic team, intergenerational. Because, of course, that the age difference and also the difference in stages of your career will create discrepancies in the perspectives of everyone. And then the writing or diagram of information in the newsletter and in the directory depends on Mike Marion, Thomas, me, and probably certain assistants with other tools such as Google LLM Artificial Intelligence Studio, just to go through all the amount of raw content that we need to filter, edit, and then go through and try to pinpoint the most important part so we can later on share it with you in the upcoming versions of the directory and the monthly versions or bi-monthly versions of the newsletter. But that's pretty much the process, the work stream, the workflow, and our invitation for you to connect with us, and please assist us with the gathering of information and even with the curating of that information, because it's a lot to handle. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lorenzo. And I'd just like to point out that also in this initial phase, we've been driving the information gathering, but in the next phase, we hope that once we've contacted all the relevant organizations, that they will push information to us. So there will be a stream of information coming to us, and we don't want to compete with existing services, but we want to really provide a platform to host information, to advertise information from all the main providers. It's, I think, really the role of the World Academy to be a facilitator in information flows, in networking. Okay, I'm handing over now to Ortwin, who will talk to us about polycrisis, about the interwoven crisis that we now face. It's not just different silos, different categories, but it's a systemic problem. Ortwin, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Thomas, and I'm very glad also to be associated with this group here, and I learned a lot about what they had discussed in the past. What I would like to contribute is a publication that has just been published a few weeks ago, and I put it in the chat, in which Huan Li and myself, Huan Liu is a professor for disaster management at Kyoto University And I was there for 3 months as a visiting professor, and we both try to make a summary of what it means to be confronted with polycrisis and systemic risks. And I would like to make it crisp. We had identified 5 major elements or properties of polycrisis or systemic risks leading to polycrisis. And I'd like to mention those because I think they're quite crucial for understanding the nature of polycrisis. So the first one is complexity, and I'll go a little deeper into those ones when I have listed all of them. First one is complexity. The second one is intersectoral connectiveness. The third one is system exceeding consequences. The fourth one is deep uncertainty. And the fifth one is nonlinearity with tipping points. Now, let me go a little deeper into each of them. Complexity, I mean, was a word that has been very fashionable, but what we really mean is that we have a lot of intervening variables between causes and effects that make it almost impossible to have really good predictive models. So what we can do basically is to say either, after the fact what happens, we can try to model the most important influential factors and triggers. Well, we should be aware that we cannot have a clear picture of everything, and that there are a lot of connections that we will probably miss. And that, of course, makes it very difficult for scientists to become credible in the discourse. That's one thing. And secondly, it makes it also difficult for politicians because they're not quite sure what to believe and not to believe. And the demarcation lines between fake news and probable news and certain news is not easy to draw. The second point, I think even refers more to issue of crisis management, is that crises now trespass the system in which they are embedded. It means that we cannot govern risks anymore in silos. And so most of the risks or big crises that we face are crises that really affect many different areas. So, for example, the pandemics that we faced, had a clear health issue, and that was the original one. But it also had an issue in businesses, and we had a lot of bankruptcies. It had a lot of implications for education. A lot of kids didn't learn anything. It had a lot of implications for private violence and for in isolation of people. So we could go on and on and on. And what really was a problem is that the various agencies or ministries only deal with one at a time. So they were looking at the health issues, there was the health ministry, and then the education minister said, well, wait a minute, we cannot close all the schools. And then the economic ministry said, well, we can't get all our restaurants out of business. So suddenly we had a cacophony of different voices, and there was no real, a governance structure to set the right trade-offs to deal with competing values. The third one is that these consequences of different single crises may be triggers of secondary and tertiary crisis. And we very often call this cascading effects, or sometimes they're infecting or contagious effects. And that's something that makes it very difficult for its risk assessment, because what we can see is that, let's say, the crisis is being triggered, and the consequences triggers the next crisis, and that triggers the third and fourth and fifth, and they're not causally related. But the impacts have, again, an impact on other various dimensions that we value. And that's quite a problematic issue, because very often we have very good models, being in one silo, but we don't have ones which tells us about these cascading effects between and among different activities. The fourth one is deep uncertainty, and deep uncertainty basically means that our probabilistic assessments are very often weak. And one of the things I think was also mentioned in the chat already, if everything is connected, small things can make a big difference, because there are millions of small things that can happen in largely connected systems. If we have a very isolated system, very unlikely systems are unlikely, and we need probability theory to prioritize action. But if everything is connected, we have a million events with a probability of 1 over a million that may have an impact. And that means one of them will happen, or very likely to happen, but we don't know which. So there are millions of black swans, but we don't know which one will happen. And that makes it very difficult in terms of assessment, because we cannot just say, okay, we take 2 or 3 standard deviations of our Poisson distribution, but we need to get into the tails, and then it gets very complex and sophisticated. But we are bound to do that, because otherwise we miss the millions of black swans that are out there to bother us. And the last thing is nonlinearity with tipping points. And that's an interesting point. I mean, I think we're used now to nonlinear relationships. It's against our intuition to make communication extremely difficult. And we know a lot of experiments in which we can see that people's perception really is basically linear. And then, if they face nonlinear kind of relationships, they're really perplexed. Tipping point is even worse, because basically our learning is has its foundation on trial and error. So if we go to school, we get a bad grade, a good grade, that means we work more or less. The economy is based on trial and error. We have a product that doesn't sell, we go bankrupt, and then we have another one. If we have a causal relationship with tipping points, everything works fine until we reach the tipping point, and then it's too late. And that, of course, is very much true for a climate change phenomena. And so the problem basically is that you get positive feedback, and so you do the same thing. And until you reach that specific point, it's very often we don't know the tipping point, and then we exceed it, and then, of course, it becomes extremely expensive or even impossible to go back to the original state. And that means we have to anticipate something before we actually feel the consequences. And we can see that in pharmacology, we had that people, we know a little bit of a high probability of, let's say, getting a breast cancer, and you do something in advance before we have any pain and before we have any visibility of a tumor. That's extremely difficult. And it's also ethically a very difficult question. But nevertheless, if we think we have these kind of existential risks with tipping points, we have to do something before the tipping point is reached. And that is extremely difficult to communicate. It's very difficult to get resources for that. And it's also difficult to convince people that that's necessary. So in line, what we're really facing are these 5 very difficult properties of these systemic risk of polycrisis: complexity, intersectoral interconnectedness, system exceeding consequences through contagious effects and cascading effects, deep uncertainty with all its implications, and nonlinearity with tipping points. And I think those are the kind of properties that we would like to explore more quantitatively and qualitatively to get a better idea of how to assess these existential risks, but also better management and governance structures. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Ortwin. That's a great overview of the complexity, of course, of the business of predicting the future, which is impossible. But there is such a thing as foresight, and there's good and bad ways of going about it, and none better than David Harris, who's a member of Extra, our next speaker, to speak about that, because David is a foresight expert. And I hand over to him, and perhaps he can also address some of the questions in the chat about, what can we predict? How can we go about reducing, building scenarios, understanding what could happen, understanding also the uncertainties. But I'll leave it to you, David. Over to you.
Let me start then. Ortwin, I really enjoyed your presentation. I don't know that you can see this, but here's one of my textbooks. I love the cover. Strategic Foresight, Learning from the Future. And
I see, yeah.
Hey, the pencil and the bottle opener. How many times have we had a problem doing something we thought we knew how to do?
Yeah.
About 50 years ago, I left the Flat Earth Society because I knew that I had to be able to find some way to think or to look over the horizon. Even with our telescopes and binoculars, unless you get on high ground, unless you have a mindset for looking over. In my mindset, Extra is a very excellent tool for human security foresight. Human security, another one of the activities I've been involved in for decades. As Ortwin and others have pointed out, we're in a turbulent, probably underestimates it. The future, good and bad, is arriving faster and faster. We hear the word acceleration again and again. The present welcomes more and more new history, a messy combination of what is being exposed from the past and added to existing records, many of which we're familiar with. And there's a lot of contradictions there, especially now that we're more or less at the mercy of artificial intelligence. And competence and control is less and less what is demanded now, and that is what likely to be sufficient, acceptably, in the future, to do in time what is needed, let alone what is wanted. And I'm trying to be kind here. It's not about incompetence, because for me, incompetence is something that is personally caused. It's incompetence. We just aren't up to what is transpiring. Remember back in the 20th century, everybody, business schools, businesses talked about SWOT. The way you looked at a issue or a problem, you talked about strengths, then you looked at weaknesses, but those were our strengths and our weaknesses, and then opportunities and threats. And what this context compression in the 21st century has done is turned it around. And one of the reasons that I think extra has immense value, got to look at the threats and risks first, and then the opportunities, because never wasting a good crisis means that you have to take the opportunities that all this turbulence provides. Weaknesses, if we look at the threats and the opportunities, our weaknesses and the weaknesses of the system will become evident. And of course, strengths, hopefully, with all that we have to do, there's a number of strengths we think still are eligible, relevant, serious, but we can set them aside because we have so much to do. Strategic foresight, yes, prediction, yes, forecasting, but only out to a point. And we have to get ahead of the points at which prediction and forecasting are effective. The other thing that has always bothered me, I know my panelists know, but others watching may not, that I spent 35 years in the military. And one of the things about a strategy was that you had to get well into the mind of the enemy and what the enemy was thinking of doing. And strategic foresight provides the opportunity, it's a choice, the opportunity to identify and articulate. And of course, if you can't articulate what future context is, then people are not going to buy in. And the strategy is a plan of action. But of course, the action that is needed today, and the action that is needed tomorrow, and the action that is needed in 2026 and whenever will be different, which is, in my view, a reason for doing strategic foresight as a routine activity. From my work with the military, with business, with diplomats, and maybe most often with civil-military relations events, here are a set of foresights. I won't read them all, but for thoughtful decision makers, in my experience, these have all been borne out. It provides a number of strengths to be able to be more prepared for what is going to happen soon, next, or after next. One of the best papers I ever read comes from, I think, the 1960s, even before internet, social media, worries about climate change, and it was The Military After Next. And the person was purely, truly prescient. I'm going to leave that, and now I'm going to go to a very short video that was used for 4 or 5 years in the 2010s as part of my work with Aboriginal people throughout Canada.
One of the great ways of communicating is to tell somebody a story of what happened to you yesterday, maybe of the lessons that you learned yesterday, and to tell stories about today, what you're going to do today and what you hope transpires. We don't know what the future is going to hold. So one of the great ways of thinking about the future is to tell stories about what the future might hold. And if we do that together, we're sort of setting ourselves apart from all the daily concerns and urgencies in a non-liable setting and enjoying telling stories about what we hope the future will bring. The future right now is all fiction. We do not know what will happen, but something will happen. And if we use our imagination, and if together we open up with stories, we will see patterns, and we will see signals, and we will see indicators of things that are more likely to happen. Foresight recognizes that the future is inherently uncertain and unpredictable, and therefore it can't be forecast and it can't be predicted, but it must be prepared for. The main goal of Foresight is insights that you can use today to better prepare for and shape the future. Be brave enough to open up. Be brave enough to tell stories that you might not tell in normal daily circumstances. Be open enough with your fellow participants to let your biases and your assumptions and your interests, to put them on the table. Because if you do that, they are more likely to do that. And the more often and the more thoroughly everyone's biases, interests, and assumptions are put on the table, the better the foresight exercise will be.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Very good point there. I think that foresight is a collective exercise because none of us can make the future on their own, and it's the conversation about the future that gives us a handle on it, that we have among each other. But I'd like to now open the floor to some questions. If anyone would like to contribute, we had some amazing comments in the chat. If you just raise your hand, and particularly, it's a lot of comments from David Wood. No, I haven't got any takers.
Well, thank you. I think I
okay.
am given the mic. I think this was a great session. I want to congratulate you, Thomas, and the team. My question is, to what extent will quantitative analysis come out of this that might direct all of us to focus on some of these risks more than others? Obviously, we want to cast the net reasonably wide, but perhaps there will be some analysis that says, you know what, this emerging risk has been under-researched and deserves a heck of a lot more of attention than is already being given to it.
Yeah, I don't think we have the capacity in-house to do that analysis, but we can bring people in who have the expertise. And at the moment, we are a small group, and we deliberately kind of shrunk ourselves. We were quite a lot bigger, and we shrunk ourselves in order to get agreement, make it easier to take action on the website and so on. But now we want to bring in the people who have that capacity, people who have maybe were in leading positions in organizations. So we want to grow a network. Quantitative analysis is, of course, these are, expensive research projects you're talking about. For that, we would need funding or people who have the funding already. I think there's quite a lot of organizations out there, NGOs and so on, and UN bodies and so on, who are doing that analysis, but there is just so much of it. It's very hard to see the big picture, and that's really where we want to come in.
This is Paul. Thank you very much.
Oh, Paul. Okay.
The biggest problem you face is how to manage this incredible complexity. And I just had one small thought, which does not represent the whole complexity. But there are many discussions which say that the conflicts tearing apart humanity are based in part on the need for a more integrative worldview, combining everything from real mathematics to first-person experiences. I was delighted to hear Harry's mention of Aboriginal people, because I believe the kind of people I have met in the Yukon and Alaska represent a depth of the human mind which really needs to be integrated together with the other things, from everything from our religions to our mathematics. And I think the more ancient cultures from these people, like what I've seen in Alaska and the Yukon, is a crucial element in the kind of integration we really need to be working on as one big part of our survival.
Yes, I completely agree, Paul. I think the fundamental problems we have are ethical, moral problems, and the sort of, perhaps it has something to do with the way our lifestyles have changed from what we were used to for millions of years, living as hunter-gatherers, early agriculturists in small communities, and the kind of rapid growth of world population, the complexity that we our lives that we face in our daily lives, the alienation, all that has changed the way we relate to each other. It's kind of detached us from our moral moorings, and I think that's a major problem. My work is on food security and food system threats, and I think for me the key problem is, and I'll be on a panel later tonight in a few hours, is the collapse of moral economy. So there are deeper social and ethical issues. I think Lorenzo and David also wanted to say something.
Behind me, you will see a very large stone cut done in 1962 by a person who became a friend of mine when I worked and lived in the Arctic, Pudlo Pudlat, in Pond Inlet, Canada's Inuit Artist Construction Center. The Loon Speaks to the Fish is the title, and it sort of sets my communications ideas in motion. The Inuit, Indigenous people, certainly in Canada, think about 7 generations. 7 generations. That is a very important mindset. They understand there will be, as Paul Werbos has said, incredible uncertainties. But if I may, if you can imagine an uncertainty, it is not incredible. It is something you can work with as a scenario for your analysis of the future. And as to sort of the quantitative aspect of it, yes, very, very specialized, very, very demanding. But as to priorities, we know right now what is of most concern to us. And if we share that and look forward either to how well we've prepared now or how well we might be able to prepare in the future, then I think we can get ahead of some of the quantitative.
We've been told to close the session. It was a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, the speakers and our audience, and thank you for the questions. We hope to stay in touch.